By the time the sun rises over Midlothian on April 18, 2016, the church is no longer just a building, it's evidence. The body has been found, emergency calls have been made, and the surveillance footage exists. Now the investigation has to move from what happened to who could have made it happen. That transition is where cases either become disciplined or distorted. This is the Midnight Mystery Archive, and this is part 2 of the Missy Bevers case. In the days following the murder, police don't begin by naming suspects. They begin quietly, reviewing access, interviewing class participants, pulling phone records, mapping movements. This is standard homicide procedure, according to former investigators interviewed by Dateline NBC and outlined in reporting by WFAA in the months after the crime. There are no announcements. There's a common belief that detectives start by asking who would want someone dead. But law enforcement manuals and veteran investigators consistently say the opposite. You start with who could have been there. That approach was confirmed by Midlothian police in early press briefings when they emphasized they were reconstructing access and timing before forming any conclusions about motive. Because motive can be imagined, presence cannot. In this case, knowledge itself becomes a form of evidence. The person inside the church appears to know that the building would be empty, that a class was scheduled that morning, and that Missy would arrive early and alone. Police have never publicly confirmed how much of this they believe the suspect knew in advance. But in interviews with WFAA, investigators acknowledged that the schedule and building access were central to the early investigation. If you listen carefully to police language in this case, you'll notice what they avoid. They'll say things like individual captured on surveillance video, person of interest, subject. What they don't say, suspect identified. That distinction is deliberate. Legal experts interviewed by CBS DFW have pointed out that premature labeling in unsolved cases can permanently damage both prosecutions and innocent lives. And in this case, the only visible figure is anonymous, a silhouette in borrowed authority. When Midlothian police released the footage, they hoped someone might recognize the person's walk or clothing. Instead, the video became something else, a canvas. Internet forums, Reddit threads, and YouTube breakdowns exploded, analyzing posture, stride, length, body type. Police publicly cautioned against those interpretations, stating in multiple interviews that the footage was not sufficient for identification on its own. That warning was repeated in statements carried by WFAA and later echoed in Dateline NBC's coverage. After the video release, the public narrative accelerates. The police narrative slows. Fewer statements, less specificity, no confirmations. Former homicide detectives interviewed by national outlets described this phase as containment. You release less, so the person responsible might reveal more. True crime has trained us to expect a certain shape, a suspect, a motive, a reveal. But unsolved cases don't move that way. They fragment and splinter. Psychologists and trauma researchers consistently warn that grief does not follow patterns. Some people withdraw, some become hyperverbal, and some appear calm. Dateline, in its coverage of the case, quoted behavioral experts stating plainly, "There is no reliable way to diagnose guilt through demeanor. And yet we keep trying." Think back to our coverage of the JonBenet Ramsey case. What narrows a suspect pool is not body language, it's data. Things like cell phone pings, vehicle locations, work schedules, key access logs. Midlothian police have confirmed in multiple interviews that digital and location evidence formed the backbone of their investigation, even when those details were not released publicly. We know that names circulate online, but police never repeat them. Former prosecutors interviewed by the Dallas Morning News explain why. A name, once it becomes public, means witnesses unconsciously reshape memory to fit the story. Tips easily become contaminated, and silence preserves the truth inadvertently. This stage, in real life and in this series, there is no responsible way to say who did this. Only how narrow the circumstances and the timeline were. There is one image that defines this case more than any other. A figure, helmeted, padded, face hidden, walking slowly through a church hallway before dawn. It looks official. It looks deliberate. And it looks at first glance like authority. But law enforcement have been clear from the very beginning. This was not a police officer. Midlothian police stated in early press briefings, statements later repeated to WFAA and Dateline NBC, that no local, county, or federal agency had personnel operating in the church on that morning. The uniform was not issued, it was assembled, and that distinction matters more than it seems on the surface. Within hours of the footage being released, investigators realized the clothing itself would become central to the story, not just as a disguise, but as a strategy. Former homicide detectives interviewed by Dateline described it this way: uniforms don't just hide who you are, they change how people react to you. Authority slows resistance. It delays fear. It creates hesitation. And hesitation changes outcomes. Midlothian police have confirmed only a small number of details publicly. That the suspect wore a helmet, a tactical style vest, dark boots, and what appeared to be police style clothing. They have not confirmed where the items were purchased, whether they were surplus, whether they were stolen, or whether they were modified. When asked directly by CBS DFW whether the gear was authentic law enforcement equipment, investigators responded only that it was police style, not police issued, and that phrasing is deliberate, because many of these items are legal to buy, perfectly legal, online, at surplus stores, through private vendors. The uniform is rare, but not exclusive. Disguise in crime is usually imagined as impulsive. It might be a mask, a hoodie, a pulled down hat. Think of some of the famous suspect drawings we've seen, the Unabomber, the Zodiac. They all had distinct disguises. But criminologists interviewed in Dateline's coverage point out that deliberate disguise suggests something else: anticipation. You don't disguise yourself unless you expect to be seen. And you don't choose a uniform unless you expect interaction. That doesn't prove the suspect expected Missy specifically, but it does suggest the person inside the church expected someone. If you've seen the footage, you know the walk: measured, heavy, unusual. It became the centerpiece of speculation. Was that person injured? Was it a woman, a man, someone familiar? Police cautioned against drawing conclusions from gait alone. In interviews with WFAA, investigators stated clearly that clothing, weight, padding, and boots can dramatically alter movement patterns. Former forensic analysts quoted by CBS DFW echoed that statement, saying, "You can't diagnose identity from a walk when body mass, footwear, and balance are artificially altered. The walk itself feels revealing, but it isn't reliable." The gear accomplishes three things simultaneously. It conceals face shape, hair, and skin tone. It distorts height, weight, shoulder width, and it disrupts posture, stride, and arm swing, which means that traditional eyewitness reconstruction becomes nearly useless. This is why Midlothian police have repeatedly emphasized that the video alone cannot identify the suspect. It shows presence, but not personhood. It is tempting to treat the uniform as evidence of profession, but police have warned against this repeatedly. They have never stated the suspect is a police officer, former law enforcement, or military. Those assumptions do persist online, but they are not supported publicly by the evidence. Former FBI profilers interviewed by Dateline cautioned that criminals often choose authoritative disguises precisely because they are not authoritative. It's camouflage. There is another detail that makes the uniform more complicated. No theft was reported from the church. No known robbery occurred. No clear objective beyond movement through the building, which means the gear wasn't chosen to protect during a burglary. It was chosen for interaction. That is uncomfortable to acknowledge because it pushes the case back toward intent. People often ask, why not release the brand? Why not release the exact model or every detail about the outfit? Former prosecutors interviewed by the Dallas Morning News explained it this way: because very specific knowledge can act as a confession filter. If only the person who assembled the gear knows certain details, then revealing them publicly contaminates any future statements. To this day, the public does not know where the uniform came from, how it was acquired, how long it took to assemble, or whether any piece was ever traced. Those answers may exist somewhere, but they do not exist publicly. And in an unsolved case, that boundary matters. The clothing does something else too. It becomes a symbol. It allows distance. We stop seeing a person, we see a shape, a role, a figure. And figures are easier to theorize about than humans. That distance is really seductive But it is also dangerous because cases are solved by understanding people, not the costumes that they wear. The uniform does not tell us who the suspect is. It does tell us how carefully they wanted to remain unknown. And that distinction will matter as we move into the next phase of this case, where timelines collide with popular explanations and where many theories begin to fail under pressure. Every unsolved case eventually attracts theories. It is inevitable. Some of those theories are careful, some are built from emotion, some of them are inevitable based on how people interpret what they see. But in the Missy Bevers case, something unusual happens. Most theories collapse. Not because they're immoral or they're offensive, but because they don't fit inside the time. And time is the one witness in this case that does not change its story. At the end of part 1, we establish something narrow and uncomfortable. The suspect is inside the church before 3:50 a.m. Missy arrives around 4:16 a.m. The encounter occurs shortly after, and by 5 a.m., 911 is called. Those timestamps come from surveillance footage and dispatch records referenced repeatedly in reporting by WFAA and confirmed by Midlothian police in public statements. That window is less than 90 minutes, and realistically, it's far less than 90 minutes. Which means any explanation must answer 3 questions. How did they know where to be? How did they get inside? And how did they leave unseen? If a theory cannot answer those 3 questions, it doesn't survive contact with the clock and that narrow window of time. One of the earliest explanations offered was that the person was burglarizing the church and Missy just happened to walk in. On the surface, that theory sounds simple, but police quietly dismantled that theory very early. Midlothian police told CBS DFW and WFAA that nothing of value was reported stolen. No offices appeared targeted, and the suspect's movements did not resemble property search patterns. Former burglary investigators interviewed by Dateline added something else. Burglars don't wear full tactical gear. They wear clothing that allows them to run. This theory fails the timeline, and it fails behavior. Another explanation suggested the person was vandalizing the church. But again, no ideological messaging, no targeted destruction, no escalation pattern. Police have never described the scene as vandalism-driven. And in interviews with local media, investigators described the broken interior glass as limited and inconsistent with typical vandalism behavior, which leaves us again with intent, not chaos. Some theories propose Missy wasn't the intended victim, that someone else was expected. This theory survives longer than most, but it too runs into logistical problems. Fitness classes are not secret. Schedules are public. Participants are fluid. Instructors change. Police told WFAA early in the investigation that Missy's class was advertised and routine, which means if someone expected a different person, they would have needed the wrong schedule, the wrong target, but the correct time and the correct building. That combination strains plausibility. It's not impossible, but it's not plausible. Many listeners instinctively move toward personal motive, spouses, friends, colleagues. Police have never publicly confirmed such a motive. In fact, Midlothian police stated repeatedly that they were not prepared to identify motive at all. Dateline later reported that investigators examined Missy's personal and professional relationships extensively, as is standard practice, but did not announce conclusions. That silence is often misread as secrecy, but sometimes it simply means evidence doesn't cooperate. Once a story forms online, it gains weight. People begin to interpret new information through that lens. Former prosecutors interviewed by the Dallas Morning News described this as the, quote, gravitational pull of early theories. Once a theory takes hold, everything bends to fit inside of it. Witnesses reinterpret memories, neutral behavior becomes suspicious, silence becomes evidence, and the case drifts away from what can actually be proven. Law enforcement rarely uses the phrase most likely because probability is not proof. Midlothian police have consistently stated only that the person in the video is connected to the crime, the case remains open, and they continue to receive tips. Those statements have been repeated in interviews with CBS DFW throughout the years. That restraint frustrates people, but it preserves the case. When investigators test theories, they don't ask, does this sound convincing? They ask, could this person physically be here at this time, leave this way, and vanish before the next arrival? In the Missy Bevers case, that filter eliminates far more explanations than it confirms. At this stage, the honest answer to many questions and theories is, we don't know. Not because the case was mishandled, but because the person responsible engineered it to resist clarity with the disguise, with timing, with location. Those are not accidents. They are design. When speculation is stripped away, what remains is stark. Someone entered the church before dawn. They waited or moved very deliberately inside. They encountered Missy Bevers shortly after she arrived, and they left before anyone else knew. This is not a theory. This is the floor of reality. Everything else must sit on top of it. The Missy Bevers case doesn't lack stories or theories. It lacks conclusions. And the difference between those two things is where responsible investigation lives. By the end of part 2, the most difficult truth in this case becomes clearer. Not who did it, but how carefully the truth has been protected and how easily it can be distorted. The Missy Bevers investigation does not suffer from a lack of theories. It suffers from an excess of them. And when theories outpace evidence, you don't get solved cases. You get cases that are reshaped by what the timeline shows. And when theories outpace evidence, they don't solve cases. They reshape them. What the timeline shows, what the building allows, and what the uniform conceals. All point to something narrower than most explanations are willing to accept. Not chaos, not accident, but intention. That doesn't tell us who. It tells us how high the bar for certainty must be. In part 3, we'll move beyond the first phase of this investigation. We'll examine how evidence evolves over time, what changes when years pass without resolution, and how law enforcement balances public pressure against investigative discipline. Because in cold cases, time doesn't just obscure answers, it changes the questions. If you'd like to stream episodes, submit a case, or follow us on social media, go to midnightmysteryarchive.com. You can do all of those things right from the homepage. You can also join the official Midnight Mystery Archive Facebook group. It's linked in the episode description. It's where you can come, discuss the cases we cover on the show, as well as other cases in the news. Another thing to keep in mind, I've created a Substack, so I'll be able to communicate with you guys outside of social media and outside of just the podcast. I'll be able to share insights on the cases and the stories that I cover, upcoming episodes and series that I'm working on, as well as other projects that I'm involved with that I think you might find of interest. I might even give you a glimpse into how I prepare and develop the podcast episodes. Be a great way for you to learn more about me, what I do, how I do it. And if you believe that what we're doing on this podcast is of value, please consider leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps us to reach new listeners and to bring new ears and new eyes to the stories we tell. This has been part 2 of the Missy Bevers investigation from the Midnight Mystery Archive. On Monday, a mini episode, and next Friday, part 3. We'll see you next time.